War. What is it good for? Emus, apparently. You think you've heard it all, right? Wars fought over land, resources, even religion. But have you ever heard of a war waged against birds? Well, buckle up, because Australia's Emu War of 1932 is about as weird and wonderful as history gets. Picture this: the Australian army, armed to the teeth, facing off against a formidable enemy, a bunch of emus. Yes, you read that right, emus. Those big, flightless birds with a reputation for being more curious than cunning. It sounds like something out of a Monty Python sketch. But as we'll see, this was a real event with real consequences. For the humans, at least, the emus, those feathered fiends, pretty much walked or waddled away from it all with nary a scratch. So how did we get to this point? What could possibly drive a nation to declare war on a bunch of birds? Let's dive deeper into this bizarre chapter of history, shall we? A feathery foe setting the stage for the Emu War. To understand the Emu War, we need to rewind to Australia in the 1920s. Imagine vast wheat fields, the promise of a bountiful harvest. Farmers, many of them World War I veterans, worked tirelessly. But amidst this idyllic scene lurked a feathery foe, the emu. Emus, you see, are nomadic birds with healthy appetites. They love to roam and graze, and wouldn't you know it, those wheat fields looked like an all-you-can-eat buffet. At first, the emus were a minor nuisance, but then came the Great Depression. Wheat prices plummeted, farmers faced ruin, and to make matters worse, the emu population exploded. They descended upon the wheat fields in their thousands, gobbling up crops, trampling fences, and leaving behind a trail of, well, you can imagine, the farmers were desperate. Their livelihoods were on the line. They appealed to the government for help. When push came to shove and peck, the breaking point. The Australian government, already grappling with the Depression, faced a unique dilemma. How do you fight an enemy that outnumbers you, has no fear, and, let's be honest, looks kind of ridiculous? Remember, these were tough times. Farmers, the backbone of the nation, were on their knees. Something had to be done. The government listened. A delegation of farmers, their pleas backed by photographs of ravaged fields, met with the Minister of Defence, Sir George Pearce. And so, in a decision that would forever etch itself in the annals of history, the Australian government declared war on emus. Yes, you heard me right, war on emus. Now, I'm no military strategist, but even I can see the absurdity of this situation. How do you even fight a war against emus? It's like bringing a tank to a pillow fight. But hey, desperation can lead to some interesting choices. Operation Bird Be Gone, the first shots fired and missed. With the declaration of war came action. The Emu War officially commenced in November 1932. The weapon of choice, Lewis machine guns, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute. That's right, they were going to fight emus with machine guns. Leading the charge was Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery, a man who no doubt thought he'd seen it all in World War I. Little did he know, he was about to face an enemy far more elusive than any he'd encountered in the trenches. The initial plan was simple: find a large flock of emus, herd them into a tight group, and let loose with the Lewis guns. Sounds easy, right? Wrong. Turns out, emus aren't exactly known for their military formations. They scattered, dodged, and generally refused to cooperate with the Army's battle plan. The first engagement was a disaster. The machine guns jammed. The emus, those feathered bullet sponges, proved remarkably resilient. The soldiers, I imagine, must have felt like they were in a Looney Tunes cartoon. Section 5. Emu Evaders Round 1 goes to the birds. News of the war's progress, or lack thereof, spread like wildfire. Newspapers had a field day reporting on the Army's struggles with a mixture of amusement and thinly veiled criticism. One headline famously proclaimed, "Emus win first round," and well, who could blame them? The mighty Australian Army, veterans of Gallipoli and the Western Front, were being outmaneuvered by birds. It was both hilarious and a little bit embarrassing. But the emus weren't just dodging bullets, they seemed to be adapting to the Army's tactics. They broke into smaller, more mobile groups, making them even harder to target. They used their natural camouflage to blend into the landscape, disappearing into the bush at the first sign of danger. These weren't just birds, they were feathered ninjas, masters of guerrilla warfare. Section 6. Back to the trenches or wheat fields, a change of tactics. Faced with mounting criticism and a distinct lack of dead emus, the army decided to change tactics. They abandoned the machine guns, much to the relief of the emus, I'm sure, and resorted to more traditional methods. Soldiers were dispatched to snipe at the emus from the backs of trucks. It was like something out of a Mad Max movie, except instead of chasing down gasoline-guzzling war machines, they were chasing after birds. This new strategy, while slightly more effective, was still far from a resounding success. The emus, ever adaptable, learned to run alongside the trucks, staying just out of range of the soldiers' rifles. It was a scene of utter chaos. Trucks bouncing across the outback, soldiers hanging on for dear life, firing wildly at a bunch of birds that seemed to be mocking them with every hop, skip and peck. Section 7. Victory, not so fast. The emus hold strong. Despite the army's best efforts, the emus refused to be defeated. They continued their reign of terror on the wheat fields, seemingly unfazed by the humans' attempts to stop them. The war dragged on for weeks, each encounter more absurd than the last. The emus, those feathered warriors of the outback, were proving to be a far more formidable enemy than anyone had anticipated. The soldiers, initially gung-ho about teaching these birds a lesson, were becoming increasingly demoralized. Imagine going to war and coming home defeated, not by a foreign army, but by a bunch of birds. Their pride was bruised, their uniforms were dusty, and their trigger fingers were probably getting sore. Section 8. A war on pause. Retreat and re-evaluation. With casualties mounting on the side of the wheat fields, that is, not the emus, public opinion turning against the war, and the government facing ridicule from the international community, the decision was made to call off the Great Emu War. The soldiers, no doubt relieved to be out of harm's way from both bullets and bird droppings, packed up their gear and retreated, leaving the emus to their hard-won victory. The Great Emu War, as it came to be known, was a resounding defeat for the Australian Army. It proved that even the most advanced weaponry is no match for the cunning of a determined enemy, especially when that enemy is a bird with a brain the size of a walnut. It also highlighted the absurdity of war, especially when waged against an opponent that doesn't even know it's fighting a war. Section 9. The aftermath, counting feathers instead of casualties. So what was the final tally of this bizarre conflict? Well, depending on who you ask, the Australian Army used somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 rounds of ammunition. That's a lot of lead for not a lot of feathered casualties. Estimates of emu casualties vary wildly, but it's safe to say that it was a tiny fraction of their overall population. The emus, it seemed, had won the day. In the aftermath of the war, the government implemented a bounty system, paying farmers to hunt emus themselves. This proved far more effective than the military campaign, but even then, the emu population remained healthy. They were adaptable, resilient, and frankly too numerous to be wiped out by a few frustrated farmers. Section 10, Lessons Learned, the Emu War's Enduring Legacy. The Great Emu War might seem like a comedic footnote in history, a quirky anecdote to be trotted out at parties. But like all good stories, it holds a deeper meaning. It's a reminder that nature is a force to be reckoned with, that even the best laid plans can go awry, and that sometimes the best way to win a war is to never fight it in the first place. The Emu War also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of human arrogance. We often think we can control nature, bend it to our will. But the emus, those feathered victors, proved that nature, in its own chaotic and unpredictable way, always finds a way to win in the end. Section 11, what is good for? Absolutely nothing, except a good story. The Emu War, a conflict as absurd as it was real, continues to capture imaginations worldwide. It's a story of human hubris, ecological imbalance, and the unexpected resilience of nature. It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, humor can be found, lessons can be learned, and stories can be told for generations to come. So the next time you see an emu, tip your hat to those feathered veterans of the Great Emu War. They might not have won any medals, but they certainly earned their place in the annals of history.